Well, today I continue with the second message in the series that Chris began last week. The title of the series is Follow Me, the Path to True Discipleship. Chris's first message, which again he gave last week, he was the call to discipleship. And I'll just give a very brief summary of that. Chris said that discipleship begins with accepting God's invitation to a better life. He said what is essential is not just believing, but putting our trust in following Jesus. And the goal of discipleship is to become like him, our teacher. And we as followers of Jesus are dependent upon him. And accepting the call may require a radical change in our lives, but it does result in a better life. And as disciples, we live for God's purposes, not asking God to bless our desires. So those are some of the messages that I got from Chris's message, and it's a great message, and Chris is just a fantastic preacher. So if you haven't seen it, I ask that you look at it online. So the title of my message is The Cost. So Chris talked about the call of discipleship. My message is on the cost. Take up your cross daily. And I want to talk not just about the cost, but also the rewards and the benefits of discipleship. Let me give you a kind of an outline of what I plan to talk about today so you have a sense of where we're going with it. I want to briefly address three questions. First question is, what does it mean to take up your cross? Second is, what does it mean to deny ourselves? Third is, what does it mean to take up our cross daily? And I'll offer you some suggestions. And also, I want to give you a sort of a visual summary that's been useful for me to help as we think about living out as a disciple of Jesus every day. I'll end with a story and a final comment. And, if you've heard some of my messages, I like to tell stories, so I'll tell a few stories on the way. Well, I'll begin with the story of my mom. As I said, she just passed away. She was 103, just 2 months short of her 104th birthday. It was really an amazing life, and she lived in Cape Cod. The story that I'm going to tell happened when she was 13 years old in 1934, and that was in the midst of the Depression. And what happened here to really change the trajectory of her life. So the story happened on Palm Sunday, as I said, in 1934. And she grew up in an immigrant family. Both her parents were from Norway, and the family didn't have much money. Of course, it was in the midst of the Depression. They didn't have much money, but that day Lil had a gift. I'll call her Lil, my mother Lillian Vaccarello. She had a gift, and the gift was new patent leather shoes, which she treasured. So she was wearing her shoes that Palm Sunday and planned to wear them on Easter Sunday as well. And I just mentioned that. You'll see why a little bit later in the story. Well, she had a couple of girlfriends came over, and they decided to take a walk. So as they walked through the town of West Concord, they headed over towards the river. There was a big river there. As they approached the river, and this is a familiar place to them, to the right, they could see a bridge. It was called a trestle bridge, in which a train would go over it. It was probably 25 or 30 feet above the water. And my mom, I guess Lil had an idea to her friend. She said, let's go up in the trestle bridge. So these three teenage girls went up in the trestle bridge. And wouldn't you know, as they were halfway across the bridge, they could hear the train coming. So the three of them took off and ran. Two girls made it, but my mom tripped. Her patent leather shoes weren't made for running. She tripped and fell, and as the train was approaching her, she had the wherewithal to lower herself on these wooden ties, holding on to herself with the river below and these rocks protruding up, and I've seen this river, holding herself onto it as the train went within inches of her fingers, just past her, the whistle blowing, the steam coming out from the wheels of the train, and sparks coming. So she held on, just amazing to think about. And then she says the next thing that she knew, she was walking down the embankment with a red-headed boy. This red-headed boy had been riding his bicycle in the street below, heard the train, and saw her hanging. And he went up. I get emotional because I wouldn't be here if he didn't save her. But anyway, her thought was when this red-headed boy was leading her down the embankment, she said this. She said, I felt that he was an angel from God. And she said she made a promise from that point forward she felt that God was testing her, but she made a promise to dedicate her life to helping others in any way that she could. And that really changed the trajectory of her life, because that's exactly what she did. She lived a life of helping others. I was one of 4 children. She got married at age 19. She raised us, but even in the midst of that, she had time to volunteer. She volunteered to help the Little League in which I played, and she was head of the Women's Auxiliary. She volunteered to help my 2 sisters in Girl Scouts. She volunteered to help bring the West Point Cadet Glee Club to the town in which I live, and then she arranged housing for them. That was a distinct memory that I had. And then when I got a little bit older and I could take care of my younger brother, she got a part-time job at a nursery school. And she worked at that nursery school for something like 20 years and just loved it. She found the passion in her life, which was to be at this nursery school helping these young 4- and 5-year-olds. She said that was her favorite age, 4- and 5-year-olds. Well, reluctantly, she left when my dad retired. My dad said, we want to move to New Hampshire. So she left the nursery school, and at that point, she became the assistant principal. And they moved to New Hampshire. But when she did, she continued to volunteer. She volunteered with hospice, Meals on Wheels, the Garden Club. And then after my dad passed away and she moved back to Concord where she grew up, she volunteered at the Council of Aging to help in a gift shop that raised money for the poor in the community. She and her sister started this gift shop. They also started a little group called the Tambourine Group. These are 80 and 90-year-olds, a tambourine group. And they would go to nursery schools and nursing homes to entertain people. And what was ironic, when I revisited her in their nursing home, there were groups that would come and entertain her. But she did that. Somebody noticed, and then they notified Jay Leno, and this group made an appearance on the Jay Leno show. They flew these 80 and 90-year-olds to California. She was on the Jay Leno show. And even into her 90s, she volunteered at a thrift shop at her local church on Cape Cod. So she really, truly lived out that promise as Jesus' disciple, that she made that promise to God to serve others and help others. She realized the cost of discipleship. I mean, it took time to do all these things that she was doing, but the benefit she really found, her vocation in life and her goal in life, which was to help other people. So I say that because obviously I want to honor my mom, but it's also a lead into the message on discipleship, the cost and then the benefits of discipleship. So our key verse today comes from Luke 9:23 through 25, and I'll read it. Then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? Pretty amazing words. And in Luke 14:27, Jesus follows up with an even more stark message. He says, whoever does not bear my cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Some pretty powerful words. Well, let's be honest. Bearing a cross does not sound very appealing, does it? A cross is a symbol of torture and pain and shame. We're called to bear our cross, but from a spiritual perspective, a cross also means forgiveness, redemption, and grace. It means all of that. So I'll pose the question, what does it mean what does a cross mean, to take up your cross? What does that mean? Well, from a historical context, the cross was invented by the Persians in the 6th century BC. And the Romans took it up as their form of punishment, certainly during Jesus' time. And it was, it was excruciating pain, it was torture, it was shame, and all those. And the Romans certainly used that very effectively. But from the spiritual perspective, it's dying to self. It means dying to self, taking up your cross, surrendering your personal desires, and embracing God's will. And to repeat, in Luke 9:24, Jesus says, whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. So Jesus teaches us that to try to save one's life by clinging to our self-interest and avoiding hardship for Christ will ultimately lead to us losing our life. But sacrificing our lives for Christ and leading will lead to finding a true, a meaningful, and eternal life. So that's taking up your cross. What does deny yourself mean? I think most of us have a sense of that. But it does not mean self-hatred, but it's an act of humility, obedience, and sacrifice. Self-denial means giving up things we love for things we love even more. Certainly self-denial is a battle. And we see this in Gethsemane with Jesus when he knew what he was facing. You might remember in the story the torture that he felt as he knew that he was about to face his crucifixion. But he also had his eye on something bigger. But you might recall his prayer at that point was, "Not my will, but your will." But Jesus faced that same battle. And the great battle we all face is between self-centeredness and God-centeredness. Jesus was willing to give up his comfort and even his life for something even better, for redeeming us, millions and millions of people. And he had his eye on paradise, which he would enjoy with all of his followers, including those of us that are here. Well, the Apostle Paul also faced this great battle, just as we do. In Romans 7:15, we read, this is words from Paul, "I do not understand what I do, for what I do not do. What I hate, I do." A lot of do's in there. Can you relate to that? Sometimes we do things we know we shouldn't do, and we don't do things we know that we should do. So Paul was describing his daily struggle with sin, but he discovered that carrying the cross, bearing the cross, was a great reward. He had the satisfaction of knowing that he was God's instrument in turning many, many people to a relationship with Jesus during his time, and even today. We all follow Paul's words in the epistles. And Paul experienced a well-lived life. Let me read Philippians 4:11 through 13, which reads, "I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength." Paul was expressing a sense of contentment that he had, which was the reward of experiencing the cost of discipleship. And happiness, as he's expressing, is not dependent on external factors, wealth, possessions, but it's dependent upon a relationship with God. So Paul learned to have strength in challenging times and in good times. So let's talk also about daily commitment. Luke 23 reads, "Take up your cross daily." But what does daily mean? What is implied? It means that carrying our cross and denying ourselves is not just a one-time commitment, but a daily activity. Daily means consistently committing ourselves to Jesus as his disciple. Well, let me give you 6 suggestions, ideas about how we can carry our cross daily, and these will be very, very brief. The first one is we should remind ourselves to do this, to remind ourselves to carry our cross and deny ourselves. So how do we do that? We do that by practicing the spiritual disciplines, prayer, worship, meditation, Bible reading, being involved in a small group. So to carry our cross daily, we need to remind ourselves. We need to practice love. After all, the command is to love God and love our neighbor. So practicing love, meaning showing kindness, helping those in need, making a difference in the world, taking that extra effort, which is a cost, but it's well worth it. And third is forgive people. Forgiving people who have harmed us is really the idea. Forgiveness is an act of love and self-denial. What we're denying is the sort of human reaction to want to take revenge and to harbor the harmful thoughts about someone else. But when we forgive people, it's also very freeing for us. So that's another way we can think about carrying our cross daily, is forgiving people. Another is to behave ethically. Behaving ethically is a way of denying ourselves and taking up the cross because we're treating people as we would like to be treated. And that means family, it means friends, it means in the marketplace. In the marketplace, it might mean great service, fair prices, quality products. But there's sometimes a cost. And I'll tell you a story. This is a story about someone I know in Silicon Valley. His name is John Brandon. And John experienced the cost. John was working in a startup company. He was the vice president of sales at the startup company. And he liked what the company was doing, but he had some concerns with the president. He thought the president, the CEO, was a bit of a bully and not always real ethical. So at an executive staff meeting, the CEO was proposing to do something. I don't know what it was, and John didn't describe what it was that he was proposing. But John thought it was highly unethical. And he felt that the other people on the executive staff felt it was unethical as well. But when the CEO went around the room and he asked each person, did they want to go along with it, they were sort of bullied into saying yes, 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 yes. And it came to John. And John said no. He said, this just doesn't seem ethical. And he went on to describe why he felt that it wasn't ethical. Well, 2 weeks later, John was fired from his job. And he believes it was because of his confronting that CEO. So there's a clear cost to John for standing up for what he thought was right. But he could live with himself because he made, he felt that he made the right decision. Well, the story with John also does have a happy ending. It's not always a happy ending, but he went on to have an amazing career at Adobe, and and at Apple. He worked for Steve Jobs at Apple. So he went on to an amazing career, and he was a follower of Jesus. But there is a cost sometimes to behave ethically. So that's the fourth way. A fifth way, carrying our cross and denying ourselves, is to be generous. Denying ourselves things that may look attractive but may result in overconsumption or addiction. Material things can't ultimately satisfy us. So we're called to be generous with our money. Our money, we're as a follower of Jesus, our money it's not our money, it's God's money. We're the steward of the money we have, so we're called to invest it wisely for the kingdom and to do good with it. In Matthew 6:19 through 21, Jesus says this, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So the question for all of us is, where is our treasure? What is it that we're after? Is it our reputation? Is it a career? Is it money? Is it power? Or is it God? It's a question of each one of us have to answer. We're called to not store up our treasures on earth. But being generous is not just about money, it's also about time. Where do we spend our time? Where do we invest our time? One of my favorite Bible verses, is a life verse for me, is Colossians 3:23, which reads, "Work willingly at whatever you do as though you are working for the Lord rather than for people." So whatever we do, volunteer work, a job, being in school, to work at it willingly as we're working for God, not for the people who may be our boss. Yes, we're working for them, but we're working to honor God. That means working hard at what we're doing. And when we do so, we can experience when we work hard for what we're doing, we can really represent Jesus in the marketplace. And when we do so, we can help draw other people to him. Let me give you a story from my own life. And this is, and a point I want to make is that working hard doesn't mean giving your life for the company and neglecting your family. I'll tell you a story from my own experience. A number of years ago, I ran a small software company that was acquired by a much larger company. And I liked the company, and I really greatly admired the people that were the CEOs. So I had this division. I ran this division for a while we integrated into the larger company. And then I was asked to join the executive staff as we were fully integrated. But as I looked around, I liked the people, but I noticed that the executive staff members were all basically giving their life for the company. They'd work late nights, work weekends. I had a young family, and I wasn't willing to do that. They had offered me a good salary, stock options, and all sorts of benefits, but I turned it down. I turned it down to start another company. And you may say, well, that sounds crazy. I mean, starting a company is a lot of work, right? But the person I started it with, we had families at about the same age, and we had made the decision to work hard while we were working there, but to really run it as a lifestyle company, and to make sure we didn't work very many evenings or didn't work weekends. So we ran it that way, and for me, it freed me up to spend time with my family. I had the opportunity to coach my 2 daughters in soccer, and it was well worth it. Looking back, there was a big cost to it because I lost probably hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in money, and I worked at this startup and didn't take a salary for a couple of years. But it was well worth it. I never would have traded that time for anything else. So there is a cost to discipleship. I felt that my role as a dad was certainly to make a living for my family, but also to be engaged and involved with my family. And the sixth way to carry our cross is to get out of our comfort zone. We as followers of Jesus, it's a bit unusual. We're here on a Sunday morning. It's a bit countercultural. I would guess that a lot of our friends are maybe off having brunch, maybe playing golf on a sunny day, doing other things. But we realize the benefit of being in corporate worship. I mean, there certainly is a cost to discipleship, but it's well worth it. Also, we're called, as disciples of Jesus, we're called to make other disciples, to call the Great Commission, right? And Chris is going to have a message on that a little bit later in this series, but that is getting out of our comfort zone. I know many of us feel uncomfortable sharing our faith with our friends, with our family, with other people, but we're really called to do that. And it's one thing I'll say, and Chris has a whole message on it, but what I've found in my own life, and I found God's given me the purpose, is to help other people know who Jesus is. While I've had some success earlier in my life in sports and in business, I find nothing more rewarding than knowing that I've helped somebody on their spiritual journey. Nothing more rewarding than that. But it's a challenge to get out of my comfort zone, to do that. Well, let me summarize by giving you a visual to look at. And let's see if the visual can is on the screen. I saw that what was up there was my podcast, which is maybe I was going to mention too that one of the ways that you could begin to share your faith is I've done this series of podcasts on the evidence for Christian faith. And, my invitation is to use those podcasts to reach out to your friends who are not yet believers, to look at the evidence for Christian faith. So those are available online at that website, and there's also a little card in the lobby. And it was a bit out of my comfort zones. I've never done podcasting to be able to, to do this. Well, let me summarize what I've been talking about today, and I think that this visual, it's helped me, and it may help you to think about what it means to be a disciple, and maybe the cost of discipleship, and the benefits of it. And this is a graphic that I came across many years ago, and I used to have it on my desk at work as a reminder. And a lot of us tend to think of where we put, what are our priorities? And some of us think of God first, maybe family next, maybe community or church or work or whatever. But I think a better way to think about it is put Jesus or God in the center of all that we do. And I've talked about these different aspects of that, but just briefly mentioning with our money, to think about our money as God's money. How are we spending? How are we using our money? With college or work or volunteer work is with Colossians 3:23. Work hard at whatever you're doing, but work as if you're working for God. So putting God at the center of your work. And in a church and community, be devoted to the church, the community. There's helping where there's a need. Family and friends, to be an encourager, not to be a critic, but to be an encourager of your family and friends. That's what we do as a disciple. And sometimes all these things, there is a cost to doing them. We have to go out of our way to do it. But it's what it means to be God-centered and not self-centered to do it. And I put recreation up here, which may sound a little bit unusual, but we are called to take good care of our bodies, and even in recreational activities. And I don't know what your recreational activities, but mine, I enjoy tennis, I enjoy some golf and other activities. That's a way that you can connect with other people who are not yet followers of Jesus. As an encouragement, hopefully they'll look at you as being someone that's a little bit different. And they may ask you what's different about you. It's a chance to share your faith. And now that's one of the ways that I look at some of those opportunities. So even in things like recreation, we can put God or Jesus at the center of all that we're doing. Well, let me give you a final story. This is a story about someone you might have heard about. His name is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Have other people heard of Bonhoeffer? Yep. Well, it's really quite an amazing story, and there's been a recent film, there are films, and there are books. But I'll give you his story. He was a Christian pastor and theologian, and he was born and lived in Germany. And in the 1930s, in World War II, as the Nazi Party was growing, the Third Reich was ever present in Germany, many in the church, unfortunately, supported Hitler. But he and a group of other disciples of Jesus didn't, and he opposed Hitler in every way that he could. But he had the chance to escape that. He was studying as World War II broke out, he was studying in the United States. And he had a chance to stay in the United States and then go back to Germany and be safe. But he chose the cost of discipleship to go to Germany to see if he could make a difference. And then as the war was raging, he had another opportunity to escape to London with some friends. He decided to stay to oppose the Nazi regime. Well, in the end, he was arrested for his opposition to the Nazis and in prison. And in fact, he was hanged. He was at the gallows for his opposition. And that happened, tragically, just days before World War II ended. And reportedly, as he was up to the gallows, he actually knelt and prayed at the gallows. And as he did, as he was about to die, he said, "This is the end. But for me, it's the beginning." He knew, he had his composure about him, and he knew his death was his beginning of his life, in heaven with Jesus. And most of us are not going to be called to physically give our life as Bonhoeffer did, but we are called to deny ourselves and to live for God. And I said tragically that he died just before the war, but the fact is that his reputation has grown since the war. He's had great influence on many, many people. He wrote a book, and this is ironic as well, he wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship. And this was before any of this happened to him. He knew the cost of discipleship. And in fact, he contrasted the cost of discipleship versus what he called cheap grace, which is simply believing and not being a disciple of Jesus. So Bonhoeffer is a great example of what it means to have the cost, but the benefit of discipleship as well. So let me make one final comment to maybe tie all this together. And you might have heard of this idea, business idea, called opportunity cost. Are people familiar with that term? An opportunity cost is when we're looking at alternative ways to maybe invest our money. And we should count the opportunity of not investing or not putting our time and effort into this, but choosing this. So there is an opportunity cost of not choosing something. So that's an economic principle that's been for a while. But let me give you an example of what that might be. So let's say you were just graduated from college, and you were figuring, what do you want to do? And this person just decided that they didn't want to work look like it was a hassle. They didn't want to spend the time, the effort. They didn't want to have to get up in the morning and work full time. So they decided that maybe they were going to work. Their choice was, instead of seeking a career, to work part-time, just to make enough money to get by. That was their choice. But in making that choice, there was certainly a large cost. They forego the fulfillment that comes with having a career and a full-time job. They forewent the cost of money that they could have earned, and maybe being an attractive spouse to someone, maybe having a family and buying a house. That was the opportunity cost they faced, and also later on in their life, having money that they could live on. So if someone chose to do that, and in my day, we called people that made that choice hippies. You might have heard that term. They made that choice, and I know some people that's the choice that they made for life, but there was a big opportunity cost. And I just mentioned that because we as believers, we have an opportunity, we have a cost that we could face. We can either be disciples of Jesus, or we could choose to be not disciples of Jesus. And as I've described today, there is a cost of discipleship. And it could be a large cost, it could be a small cost, but there's a cost of discipleship. But we should consider the cost of non-discipleship, not having that relationship with an omniscient God who loves us and wants the best for us. We lose the opportunity to live for God's purposes, to know what's your purpose in life, and to live that life. And potentially also losing having the eternal joy with Jesus forever. So we face that choice, whether to become a disciple or not become a disciple. So I guess my invitation is to all of us is to count the cost of discipleship. But we should also count the opportunity cost of non-discipleship. So let me give you the next step. The next step is consider this week whatever it is in your life that's getting in the way to fully committing to Jesus, to fully becoming his disciple. What is it? We're all on a growth path, and so there may be things that are getting in your way. It could be money, it could be comfort, it could be relationship, self-centeredness, whatever it might be. I ask you this week to pray about it, think about it. And remember that as a disciple of Jesus, we give things up we love for something that we love more. For me, the struggle has been comfort. I could very easily live a comfortable life. But knowing this, I try to push myself. I push myself to, in my case, to really reach out to people who are not yet believers, to try to use my money wisely. But it's a daily struggle for me, and I have to keep reminding myself to do that. So what is it for you? I ask that you consider thinking about that, praying for it, and realize the true benefits, the cost, count the cost, but know the benefits of discipleship. Well, let me pray. Lord, we know that you offer us the key to living a purpose-filled life and a meaningful life, but we sometimes struggle with doing that. The daily activities, things impose themselves on us. And we know that Satan sometimes likes to use those to draw us away from you. But Lord, I ask your help in keeping us focused on what it is, what it means to be your disciple. And help us this week to learn that, to know that, and to make a commitment to truly become your follower. And I pray this in your name. Amen.